This is where Texas politics gets interesting. Here again are two guys named Jason, some great guests, and cold Texas beer for another smart conversation on Y'all-itics, the unofficial political podcast of Texas.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Y'all-itics. We are coming to you from the Y'all-itics headquarters in Dallas, Texas. Want to do kind of a little bit of a rewind this time around because in the next couple of months it is anticipated that we're going to get the next report on freedom in the 50 states. That is put out by the CATO Institute, and if you're not familiar with their work, that is a very conservative group. And they believe very strongly in extremely limited government involvement in life and in society, and they're really big on personal freedoms. And we're going to be watching this especially closely because the last time they came out with a report, it was their 2023 edition, they listed Texas as dead last on personal freedoms in particular. So how free do you feel like you are here in Texas? We kind of explored that with them. And the curiosity is, does that Texas ranking change this time around? CATO likely to look favorably on things like so-called school choice that's been passed here in Texas, but perhaps not so favorably on the THC ban that has passed through the legislature. And so it'll be interesting to see where they come down on this. Anyway, I have taken the liberty, since we're talking about freedom, of grabbing a beer from the Union Bear Brewing Company. That's in Denton, Texas. I got that out of Whiteley's desk today to record this. You know what? He shook this. He set me up, but that's okay because I'll still have a sip. Good going, Whiteley. By the way, if anybody sees Jason Whiteley, I found this picture if you're not real familiar with what he looks like, and you're forgiven for forgetting because it seems like he's gone more than he's here these days. This looks like a mug shot. I think they did this for something fun here at work. It's a little Polaroid. Anyway, I thought I'd show that in case anybody's seen Jason Whiteley. Please tell him Y'all-itics would like to have him back wherever he is. I also wanted to look at this just because I don't think I've seen him smile like that ever. Anyway, so we are taking the liberty of doing a little bit of a rewind this time around with William Ruger. He is a Texas native himself, by the way, and he is one of the lead researchers who helps to put this report together every couple of years. And again, we're expecting a new one in the next several months. So let's rewind here and get into our discussion with William Ruger from last year, explaining why Texas is last in personal freedoms.
Hey, Happy New Year, Wheeler.
I like when we start at the same time, and I like when I get my Happy New Year out before you get yours out.
It's been so long since we've seen each other, man. It feels like that we have to just like step on each other as like old times.
It's been nice, hasn't it?
You took the words out of my mouth, my friend. Welcome back. You were on the West Coast, man. I saw you in shorts out there on Southern California.
I was. Spent the holiday just kind of hopping around different places. Spent some time in New Mexico, the land of enchantment next door,
Nice.
and then headed out to California. And here I am back in the grind again, thinking, wait, I had so much time off. Where did that go? Here I am again. This year got here fast.
You know what we didn't do on this podcast, and I just now realized it. Well, you probably are ready for. Do you have a beer ready?
I do.
Yeah. See, I have a cup of water over here, man. It's been one of those days already.
So I'm drinking.
But what are you drinking, man? What are you drinking?
I am drinking what's called a DF Dub. Have you heard of that?
No, OHB.
Yeah, it's called a DF Dub from OHB, which is Oak Highlands Brewery, and this is a German Dunkelweizen. I don't know how to pronounce that.
Yeah.
I just
dark
know
beer.
It is okay, and it has a high alcohol volume. So that's all I know about it. I haven't tried this before, so I'm going to crack one open for the both of us and sort of cheers to myself, I guess.
Diving in deep here with a high alcohol volume beer early on, man.
That's tasty.
I bet. So speaking of other states, I mean, that's kind of what this podcast is about. I'm kind of excited about it because you ran across something that really hasn't gotten any media attention since it came out.
Well, okay, and so, since you mentioned this and you tie it into the fact that I've been to some other states recently, I am now thinking like, man, I really should have expensed that trip, and just kind of called it some work research. Talked to a few people 100%. In those states about how free they feel, because that's what this is about. It's called Freedom in the 50 States. This is a project that has been going on for a while. Decade and a half or so, and it's published by the CATO Institute. There's some really smart people who, do a lot of math that I probably wouldn't be able to do. And what they've done is they've created sort of this index for how free you are, and a lot
state.
Of that, yeah, in each state. And so, you can ask somebody like, how free do you feel in your state? And, they're probably going to tell you that they feel fairly free.
This is Texas, man. 100%, bro.
Yeah,
Top
don't you
line.
think most people in Texas, if you said, how free do you feel?
Nobody's more free than we are, my friend.
Well, that's not what their study finds. Their study finds that, and they break this up into pieces. So there's different kinds of freedom, right? And economically, they do economic freedom. Economically, we do really well. But personal freedoms, they say Texas is abysmal with that. And this doesn't fall into the categories that you typically think of when you think, liberals and conservatives will, their definitions of freedom. They look at this in a very different way. And so they put together this whole index, and we decided like, wow, this hasn't gotten a lot of talk here. We should talk about this.
But this is really the epitome of big government. This shows what Texas has been doing over the last few decades as far as trying to lock us down in a number of ways. I say lock us down, people are going to immediately think of COVID. This goes back to smoking in restaurants, to carrying your gun, whatever you want to do. They look at a number of different things, and it's fascinating when we looked at this from the CATO Institute that Texas is dead last. That blew me away.
So we got Dr. William Ruger on the line. He is the president of the American Institute for Economic Research. He used to work as the professor in the Department of Political Science at Texas State University, and was also an adjunct assistant professor at the LBJ School of Public Affairs at UT Austin. So he's lived here. He's been here. He spent years here. And so he knows this state. It's not just, somebody who's looking at Texas on paper and kind of doing some math and saying, hey, you're not free enough. He says he's actually been here and lived through it and seen it firsthand. So we're going to get into a lot of the ins and outs here in just a few minutes. But I want to get into the top line takeaway for me anyway, is that Texas came in 17th overall for its freedom, and there's a bunch of different measures of this, but 17th overall. In terms of economic freedoms, Texas came in 6th, but for personal freedom, we are dead last at number 50, the very last in the country. What should this mean to people who live in this state?
Well, again, I used to live in Texas. Used to live down in Wimberley. Loved it down there. Loved the state of Texas, and loved the kind of freedom orientation, the freedom talk that people have. Unfortunately, when it comes to some aspects of freedom, there's a little bit less governmental respect for it than there are on the economic side, right? When I was in Texas, there was a lot of talk about a kind of Texas advantage, right? That on economic freedom, regulatory policy, fiscal policy, the state did great, and that was attracting people from around the country, attracting businesses, and that's true. But there's a lot of areas where Texas still falls short, and has traditionally. I used to joke with some of my Navy buddies in Texas. I used to drill down in San Antonio, and used to joke with them about how at one point Vermont had better gun laws than Texas. Now that has since been changed, but there's been a lag really, and I think mirroring on the personal freedom side, or freedom from paternalism, what we see in Texas on the economic side. And we could get into some of the reasons why if you'd like.
Yeah, let's. You showed the book a moment ago there, Dr. Ruger. The website, if anyone wants to go dig into this, is freedomin50states.org. And in the analysis for Texas, you being a former resident here, you write, Texas talks a good game about freedom, but could stand to deliver a lot more freedom-oriented policy regime for Texans. My first reaction was, who's doing it better than Texas? And New Hampshire's doing it better than Texas, huh?
Yeah, I mean, New Hampshire does the best in the country. It's our number one ranking state. And that's followed by Florida, South Dakota, Nevada, and Arizona. Those are our top five states. And you know, I've heard from Texans, well, you know, New Hampshire is the smallest state, but what about Florida, right? Florida's a big, populous state and is number two, and that's because it does really well in economic policy, as you might expect, and not nearly as problematic on the freedom from paternalism side of the house as well.
Dr. Ruger, I'm curious because Texas has routinely been at the back of the pack. Again, this is the 7th edition that we're talking about here. You've done previous editions, and they showed that Texas was, 49th or 50th in those years as well for personal freedoms. I would assume that part of the reason that you do this is to inform the electorate out there. You talk in the report about people, quote unquote, voting with their feet. But people keep on moving to Texas. Leadership here, the balance of power or imbalance of power, if you want to call it that, has not changed much over the years here in Texas. Republicans have a stranglehold on all statewide offices and all branches of government. Is it that people here just don't realize that they could be freer? Is it that people just don't care? And should they care?
Well, they might care, but getting things through the legislative process can take time. I mean, think about educational freedom. Think about the importance of school choice or backpack funding for parents and caregivers. That's something that Texas has struggled with compared to other states that have been pioneers in this area. Think about Florida, all the way back to Jeb Bush when he was governor. Think about Arizona. Think about New Hampshire and other states that have done educational freedom legislation, and Texas has struggled with that over the years. You also think again about one of the problems that Rick Perry and the Texas Public Policy Foundation, not exactly left wingers, right? But they realized years and years ago that Texas had an incarceration problem. And again, no one, whether it's Governor Perry or TPPF or any conservative as part of the right on crime movement, is soft on crime, right? But Texas has had a high crime adjusted incarceration rate. It's also had high, traditionally, although it's improved, high victimless crime arrest rates, right? And that's led to real problems. And that's one of the reasons why the right on crime and these reform efforts, actually, Texas has been a leader in that area because it wasn't doing very well. And so the reforms have had an impact, but still, it's still a real challenge. Think about gambling, right? There hasn't been gambling freedom in Texas. It has very little of that. And again, like, look, some people may
Cannabis is
not like
another one that
gambling.
you all talk about too. Same thing.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not a big fan of gambling. I understand why those buildings look so good and why companies have high profit margins there. It's not my thing, but a lot of Americans like gambling, and the state prevents that from happening in Texas. So those dollars are going to other places.
You make actual policy recommendations to
Right.
tell lawmakers they need to, here's some things you could do to make Texas
Right.
better. Fiscal policy recommendations: show more
Yep.
fiscal discipline at the local level to relieve taxpayers of crushing taxes. I assume we're talking about the property taxes, which are crushing
Yes.
all of us. Regulatory: pass a law allowing to direct to consumer auto sales so that Texans can take advantage of that new Tesla auto plant in Austin. What kind of reaction do you get from Texas leaders and from people in Texas?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of Texans, I think, when they see the numbers and they think like, well, we must be a top five state. And I love the Texas spirit, right? They want to be number one in everything, right? They want to be number one in football. They want to be number one in terms of population attraction from other states. They want to be, I think, just leading the country, and that's a great spirit. But they kind of resist the notion that like, oh, we can't possibly. It must be something wrong with your study, right? But that's actually not the case, right? Look, we look at 230 different policy issues, 230. So none of them is like such a huge percentage of the study that it's really, pushing it one way or another. And also, we just call balls and strikes, right? So we define freedom in a very traditional American way, right? It's the right to use your life, liberty, and property as you see fit, consistent with the equal rights of others, right? And then we look at those policies and we call balls and strikes, and this is where it ends up. And again, a big part of that is some of these challenges that Texas faces. Now, again, for some people who may not love freedom as much as I do, you might say, well, we'll trade off other values, equality, equity, preventing people from doing bad things to themselves, even if they were free. Look, that's fine. But the fact is like, if you love freedom, you have to let people and individuals make the choices that they make for themselves. Again, as long as they're not directly harming other people. And that's what we look at. So I think once they get into the data, they'll say, oh, I get it, right? Like, maybe people should be allowed to gamble legally in broader ways. Maybe we need more educational choice so that the government isn't picking where we have to go to school based on our school district or zip code, right? Maybe we should, not have so many people in jail because of victimless crimes, right? It's those types of things. And again, even with gun laws, right? I mean, Texas wasn't that great, 2 decades ago when it came to gun freedom. And that's kind of a surprise to some people, given the Second Amendment and the gun culture of Texas.
Sure. Of course, the legislature has passed open carry, which makes it a
Yep.
lot more free in that
Exactly.
sense. But get back into the weeds here, Tad, because people are going to be curious why Texas ranks so low when it comes to overall freedom here. You mentioned 230 different policy issues you guys look at.
Yep.
Hit on some of these here.
I mean, one problem, let's go kind of down the row. I mean, our study is divided into fiscal policy, regulatory policy, and personal freedom. Let's just go down that. So fiscal policy, the state does really great on fiscal policy. That's a really shining area, right? State taxes are low, public employment is low, government consumption as a percentage of GDP is low. The problem really for Texas in the fiscal area, like you mentioned, is not at the state level. It's actually local taxes. And, you mentioned it before, property tax issues. I still have some property in Texas, couldn't really escape in some way, I guess. And, look, we get socked with that bill every year, and it's hard. That's an area. If you think about regulatory policy, right? Occupational licensing is still too great in Texas. Scope of independent practice for like nurse practitioners needs to be reformed. It's things like that that could make it less regulated and in a way that is, better for Texans. And you might say like, well, oh, you must be a crazy person who thinks that doctors shouldn't be regulated. I'm going to be operated on by, someone. No, that's not a variable in our study because we only look at policies where there is variation among the states, where there's at least one state that is doing something differently. And when you look at that, you realize like, oh my goodness, like those other states, they haven't fallen apart. The world hasn't collapsed because they've allowed freedom in that particular area, particularly with like silly stuff. Like a lot of states regulate moving companies. You have to have like, there's a certificate of need law for moving companies. Like that's ridiculous. You don't need that, right?
Mm-hmm. And another one of the areas where you hit the state hard here was, and this may come as a surprise to some people, debt. The state and local government has a lot of debt because they keep hearing about, these huge surpluses here. The state does well with having cash on hand, but you think maybe the debt's just too heavy.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is a product of the localities, right? Mm-hmm. And look, debt is a form of future taxation, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. It's whether yourself or your children, they're going to have to pay that down the line, and servicing the debt, especially as interest rates go up, can be a real challenge. We're seeing that at the federal level, and it's going to eat away more and more of the federal budget. And one of the great things about our federal system is that states can have more discipline. They have to have more discipline in many ways because they don't run the printing presses. But yet still states can founder. I mean, you've seen states like Illinois and others really struggle in terms of their fiscal policy because of massive spending and liabilities in the future, like pension liabilities.
Yeah, and that's where you say it would affect people's freedom because that, they've got to pay those taxes. They've got to, pay off that debt.
Yeah, exactly. People forget that taxation is done through coercion, right? You're if you don't pay your taxes, what do? It's not optional, unfortunately, right? They might not literally put a gun to your head, but you're going to face potential, criminal penalties. So you have to remember that when the government spends money, the government doesn't create wealth. Individuals and businesses create wealth, and that's where they're going to come and get it.
I like how you all lay out the formulas. You're very transparent with how much you weigh different factors in coming up with the numbers. And I'll just take us down into one of the subcategories when we're talking about personal freedoms, just to give people an idea. Marriage freedom is one of the subcategories under personal freedom. You guys weight it at 3.1%. I mean, it's very specific here. And then you break down that 3.1%. You look at same-sex partnership index, sodomy laws, cousin marriage, covenant marriage, blood test required, waiting period. So just so that people know, you're not just, sort of, putting your finger up into the wind and going, we feel like, Texas is a little bit, they're not so great with marriage freedom. Let's give them a whatever grade. It's very mathematical.
Yes. And the thing about a lot of the parts of the marriage freedom area is that because of the Supreme Court cases on this, there isn't state variation on that anymore. Mm-hmm. And so it's not as if like Texas is penalized today because of that. Now, other issues, like if you think about blood test requirements or covenant marriages, having a covenant marriage option like they do in, I think it's Louisiana, that actually is pro-freedom, because if you have more options in terms of your what type of marriage you can contract into, all the better. Again, it's a very, very small percentage variable. It's a little bit like raw milk sales, right? If raw milk sales are illegal, look, that's not the thing that's causing Texas to be more or less free as a whole, right? It's a very tiny percentage, because what we do is we have a scientific weighting. We don't weight this based on what we like, because then gambling would be lower and gun rights would probably be higher. Educational choice would be higher than it probably is. What we try to look at is have a kind of, we look at the public policy literature on the cost of these policies to the people who would enjoy them, right? Because we're trying to look at basically people's revealed preferences. And that's how we get at this. And again, I recommend, again, reading the book and looking at the methodology section if you have questions, but it's essentially really trying to make sure that it's not the Ruger and Soren's weighting, but it's looking at the people who are actually affected by a restriction on their freedom of people who would like to enjoy these freedoms.
Let's get into some more of the issues here, because I haven't thought about a lot of these. Some may not impact me directly, but cannabis laws, you write, cannabis is not only, the laws here are not only harsh, they're the worst in the country. You talk about travel freedom is low. The state requires fingerprints for driver's licenses, but it does not regulate those automatic license plate readers that some companies even have, not just law enforcement. You talk about educational freedom. You call it meager in Texas. There's no private school choice programs as we watch the legislature debate school vouchers. Tobacco freedom. I haven't thought about this, but it's moderate. Smoking bans have not gone as far as in other states. Gun rights, we've talked about, it's above average in Texas. And then the last one is alcohol freedom is above average with low taxes here. You guys really look at every single really aspect of life wherever you are in the country, don't you?
Yeah, because freedom is a totality, right? It's both your ability to run a business, to seek employment, but it's also the ways in which you want to live your life as you see fit. And so that's why we look at a whole range of things, because again, like whether you like beer, wine, or spirits, the fact is that when we're putting high taxes on those things, government is putting a finger on the scale. They're reducing your freedom to live your life as you see fit. And again, I think it's up to the private sector and individual responsibility to decide when they should do things that are better for their health or not the government to put their finger on the scale. And oftentimes it's not even about, like, say, health regulation. It's because they favor one type of group over another. So I think it's either Oregon or Washington, right? They have very high spirits taxes. Well, these are also places that are big wine sellers. So this is an example of what you might call the Baptist and bootlegger coalition, right? Where the Baptists are the true believers. They, maybe want to put taxes on what they consider to be bad behavior. But then you have concentrated interests that benefit from those things. And so those two combinations lead you to things like states that have high taxes, say, on one thing that they think is sinful, but low taxes on another thing, right? And you can kind of see the hypocrisy of that, right?
I want to ask you this, Dr. Ruger. This is all published by the CATO Institute, which, for people who aren't familiar, they basically describe themselves as saying that they have led the charge for liberty in our nation and around the world for the past 4 decades. It's a public policy research organization, a think tank that creates a presence for and promotes libertarian ideas. A lot of people view things through a partisan lens. You know, they're going to look at your report, they're going to look at every one of these issues, every one of these rankings through a partisan lens. It's important to note here that when you really look at this, your standout stars in some of these categories and the ones who take the most flack in some of these categories are both so-called red states and blue states. And I think it's also important to note that if you got everything that you wanted here, if you moved, states more in the direction of quote unquote freedom, liberals would be thrilled with some of the things that you're proposing, and conservatives would be thrilled with some of the things that you're proposing.
Yeah, again, it's a nonpartisan study. We're just trying to call balls and strikes. And so again, like things like marijuana legalization, or same-sex marriage back when there was, a debate in the country about it and it wasn't decided by the Supreme Court. Those are things that liberals would have liked. But again, educational choice and gun rights, those are things that conservatives like better. And again, like I think that this is a fair appraisal. We're social scientists, right? Now, again, both Jason Sorens, my co-author, and I, we would consider ourselves classical liberals, which is a kind of a conservative libertarianism, if you will. But again, we're trying to be very careful so that anybody who can use this study, both scholars, legislators, business people, individuals wanting to move. I mean, one thing we found in this study, in terms of the scientific side of it, is that if you control for all the variables that people tend to move for, freedom is one of the variables that actually matters, right? It has an impact. So people are leaving less free states and moving to more free states, even controlling for like amenities, oceans, mountains, weather, cost of living. They're moving based on freedom.
So why are they still coming to Texas in droves? If this state is dead last in personal freedom, is it just that economic freedom trumps the personal freedom side of it?
Well, economic freedom is a really important driver here. And the fact that Texas is number 6 on economic freedom is a big reason why people are leaving these places. But again, some of the places where you're seeing a lot of movers, like South Dakota, for example, has had a lot of people move in there lately. Florida, number 2, has seen a huge influx of people, particularly from our number 50 state, New York. And New York does so horribly. I mean, even Hawaii and California, New Jersey, and Oregon, which kind of round out the bottom 5, New York is much worse than even those states. And so you're seeing lots of people moving. I mean, we've seen New Yorkers flee New York, I think all the way back to like 1957. And the only thing that really keeps its population alive is the fact that it's got international migration. But in terms of people who are living there, tons of people are leaving. And that's, I think, a big reason is because of that lack of freedom, which has all kinds of consequences for economic growth and activity, as well as personal freedoms. Because again, New York isn't exactly a high free state, because there's a myth that the conservative states or red states are good on economics, if you will, or conservative or free on economics, but are like Texas, bad on personal freedom, and that blue states are good on personal freedom and bad on economic freedom. That's not exactly true, right? New York has never been a high state when it comes to personal freedom, and it's always been quite poor on economics. And there are states like New Hampshire and others that are if you will, kind of purple states, but have been Republican or conservative in many ways, that do well on both. Nevada is an example that does well on both.
At some point, does this ever backfire on Texas?
Well, I guess the question can it maintain its advantage on economic policy as other states do better, right? Because sometimes you have states that do well, but other states leapfrog them. So it's not that they've really declined in absolute freedom in some cases, they've just declined relative to others. And I think that's one of the great things, again, about our federal system is that we can get a competition. I would say it's a race to the top, right? Who could be most free? And when other states pass them, that has consequences, right? So for example, when New Jersey used to be a place where New Yorkers fled to, as well as Connecticut. But as New Jersey has gotten worse compared to other states, then, look, they're not as competitive for former New Yorkers. Lots of those New Yorkers that might have moved to New Jersey are moving to other states now.
I'm curious, has anybody ever done badly state-wise on your rankings, and they've actually made changes to try to move up the rankings? Do you know of that ever happening?
Yeah, I mean, we get state legislative staff that talk to us all the time and say, "Hey, what could we do better?" Or they see it as a resource. Um, we've had people say, we've had people come to us and say, "Hey, could you talk to, some of our colleagues here?" So a few years ago, my co-author and I, we testified down in the North Carolina legislature for one of the committees, right? Because I think that we provide data, and it's oftentimes useful for people who live in one state to say, what are others doing? Like, to learn more about what other states are doing, because pretty soon you realize that the sky won't fall if you actually change your policies, right?
Do you know if Texas has ever reached out to you guys like that?
What's funny is I don't recall. I mean, there are people in Texas that have, right. So I've had friends up there that read the study, but have never testified for the legislature. We'd be happy to do so in a nonpartisan way. So yeah, invite us. I'm happy to come to Austin.
Yeah, if Texas calls, it's I guess the response is how much time do you have, right?
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't take a lot for me to get back to Texas. I
Well,
can go up to Comal County, where I love to hang out.
yeah, that's an awesome part of the state. Yeah, you kind of answered one of the questions I had, but that is about state lawmakers in this state. They meet every 2 years, and every lawmaker is always trying to find something to introduce in the legislature. And just curious over the years whether of any of these policy recommendations showing up. Obviously, school vouchers, education freedom, cannabis is, shows up regularly. But what are the other things that might show up?
Yeah. So there's
That
been
you
a
see?
lot of change in certain policy areas, right? So there was a period in which restrictions, these are bad things for freedom, lots of restrictions on smoking, so regulating bars, regulating restaurants, tax increases for cigarettes. That was an area where there was a lot of what you might call policy entrepreneurship. Um, and then, then you've seen periods where, like, there was a lot of activity around right to work laws.
Mm.
And even a state like New Hampshire, we got close to passing a right to work law. You saw some of this in the upper Midwest, where I think Wisconsin passed right to work. But educational freedom is really hot right now. We saw a whole bunch of places, for example, that allowed for sports betting, so increasing gambling freedom. That's been an area where we've seen a lot of activity. Marijuana policy has obviously been an area where there's been a lot of changes. I mean, heck, when we were kids, right, there were a lot of these areas that weren't allowed, right? Sports betting was something done by black markets,
Yeah.
unless you were going to Vegas. And now you could do that a lot of places. Things
Yeah.
like marijuana. Now, I will say this about marijuana. I'm a more conservative guy. I don't like the fact that more and more people are using drugs, or at least are using drugs publicly. And I'd really wish that states would get a handle, actually, and localities, on the public consumption of marijuana, because I think that determining whether this is something that should happen in the public square, in the street, is different whether individuals should be allowed to do it in their basement eating munchies, right? And I can't stand being in New York City and having to smell and walk through it. It's like you can cut that air with a knife. So
Yeah,
I
you
think
can.
we
It's
need
almost
to
a
develop
contact
better.
high.
Yeah, if we're going to be a free society, we have to develop norms of good behavior. And one thing we say in the book, we have a whole section in the introduction where we talk about the difference between wanting people to be free and what's called libertinism. We do not advocate that people live in ways that are bad for their flourishing, ways that are have all kinds of indirect ramifications, maybe on their families. Think about people who are addicted to gambling or addicted to alcohol, addicted to marijuana. We believe people should live a certain way of life that is consistent with the flourishing of themselves and their families. But we also want people to be free, because true virtue has to be chosen. And that's one of the reasons why we sometimes call ourselves virtue libertarians, which is an argument we tried out years ago. It didn't catch on, but it's a kind of conservative classical liberalism, if you will.
It's interesting that you lay that out like that, because I was curious. It almost seems like you're at odds with yourself there in a way, because unvarnished, completely freedom sounds great, but if you think about it, like, if I had the right to do just whatever I felt like doing, as long as it wasn't hurting anybody else, it would probably end up hurting me in some ways.
Yes, and again, and that's why I think that when you preach for this type of freedom that we talk about, I think we also, and this is why I bring it up, is you want to also preach the fact that let's think about the ways of living, the norms, the behaviors, the instincts that you have that are consistent with our progress and flourishing as individuals and families. And I think too often people think about freedom and just say, look, let's party like it's 1989, as the old song goes, right? Let's get crazy. But I think actually that a free society, fortunately, is one in which people have to suffer the costs of their bad behavior, if you will. And so the more free we get, actually, I think there's more of a feedback loop to living responsibly. And one of the problems of having a big, large welfare state is that actually a lot of bad behavior is essentially the costs of that are put on other people. And that doesn't allow for a feedback mechanism or the development of better norms and practices, right? I suppose you could say the body, by giving you a hangover, tells you not to drink too much. We need more of that, maybe in terms of our kind of, maybe not having the government punish us, but maybe more social disapprobation, right? Like maybe shaming for bad behavior in public is maybe underrated.
Let me ask about the common thread here. You made a point, Jason made a point also about how this is, it's across the line here. You'll have some Republican states that rank really high, some Democratic states that rank really high when it comes to a number of these issues. For personal freedom, I think people might be surprised to see California ranks 11th. Texas is 50th here. I'm curious, any surprises that you see in there first? And secondly, is there a common thread in here? Because Missouri does really well. Missouri's a pretty Republican state. West Virginia, Florida, these do all pretty well. And then you have California. So it doesn't seem like politics are at play here. Is there something else socially, culturally at play here?
Yeah, so there is a correlation between partisan lean in terms of like the more democratic a state you are in terms of partisan lean, that correlates negatively with economic freedom, right? So they do worse, generally speaking. Personal freedom is a lot noisier in the data, and I think some part of that is because you do have states that, even if they're Republican, are more, libertarian in spirit, if you will, like New Hampshire, whereas a state like Texas is more of that stereotypical red state, good on economics, not so free on personal freedom. But again, it's much noisier, although there is some correlation there. But again, a big problem is policy ideology, or a political culture, if you will. There are some states that are just paternalistic across the board, right? The government wants to control your life, whether it's in economics or in your personal life, right? That's a state like New York, which has traditionally done quite poorly on both sides of it, although it has improved in terms of personal freedom a little bit, but still not great.
Yeah, I want to. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask you about the one thing that people may run to this and think that they're going to see this issue, but it's really not out there in front. It's buried in the appendix, and that's abortion. When we start talking about freedom, that is one of probably the biggest issues right now in our politics. Let's talk about what you all did with that, because you don't actually put it into the overall rankings, but there is a whole section in the appendix dedicated to this, and you actually rank the states on this as well, and you break it into subcategories because people have a different way of seeing this. Some people see abortion freedom as a woman's freedom to choose what happens with her body. Some see it as the freedom of the fetus and whether it should be able to live. And so you break it into pieces here, but basically speaking, you find that if you are anti-abortion, you're obviously loving the state of things in Texas because it ranks very high for freedom if you are anti-abortion. If you are pro-choice, you're not thrilled with the way things are going in Texas because it ranks almost at the very bottom or at the very bottom for freedom regarding abortion if you're pro-choice.
Yeah, I mean, again, one of the reasons why we didn't put this into the main index is because if you think about our definition of freedom, right? The ability to use your life, liberty, and property as you see fit, consistent with equal rights of others. Well, that means that you have to have a definition of when life begins. And our kind of, view of the world, it doesn't answer the scientific, philosophical, or religious question about when life begins. Now, I have my own view. My colleague has his own view about when that is, but we didn't want to put it in here. Instead, what we wanted to say is let's leave it out of the main index and provide 3 different types of policy regimes that you could have. So if you're like a lot of Texans and you're pro-life, you believe that life begins, say, at birth, or sorry, at conception, then there's an index for you that we created. If you're really extreme pro-choice, right, you think that until the baby comes comes out on its birthday, that you could do anything you want with it because it's not a person, right? It's something that's has pre-personhood or any of these things. Then we have an index for you, and then there's one that's kind of a moderate pro-choice index. And we wanted to provide this so that people could kind of say, if abortion's a big deal for you, you could look at these indices. But again, because we don't have a classical liberal or free market or free enterprise view of when life begins that's kind of inherent in the political philosophy that guides this study. We wanted to leave that to other people. Now, I have very strong feelings about this issue and tend to be someone who cares about the life of children before they're born. And so that index matters to me more than, say, the extreme pro-choice one. But I understand that people have different views on that, and especially after the Dobbs case, in which states have more freedom to experiment with different policy regimes, then people could decide where they want to live in some ways if they feel strongly about this issue.
Dr. Ruger, you've been looking at a lot of elements in a lot of different states. Has anything ever surprised you over the years?
I was always surprised at actually how bad New York was compared to even number 49. I mean, there have been times in the history of this index where it's just like, it's kind of hard to imagine how different they could be, even than New Jersey or California's or Hawaii's. I guess the other thing is I was really surprised when one year Florida came out on top and eclipsed it kind of in this, because again, like, we do all this data coding. It's 230 variables times 2 years every time we do it, times 50 states. You can imagine that that's a lot of data,
Right.
coding. So we're in the weeds, and then, of course, when you plug it into our statistical work, then you see what pops out, and it's always fun to see who does it. And that year that Florida came out on top was an interesting surprise.
Yeah, I used to live in Florida, and it doesn't come out on top a whole lot, or at least not when I lived there. It didn't anyway.
When you left, they did well. It sounds
Yeah,
like
apparently
what you're
that's
saying.
when
That's
it
the
all got
message
better,
here.
and that's when it surprised you. So it doesn't sound like New York is your kind of place. I don't imagine, unless somebody made you some crazy offer, that you would decide to move to New York and work there and live there. Do you get the sense that there are companies, corporations out there, we're not even talking about individuals here, but corporations out there who are considering moves to another place, who have actually used your report or referenced it and thought, no, maybe not?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. We've had people tell us as individuals. My co-author is an example. So when we first started working on this project, I was living in Indiana, and my co-author was living in New York, and he moved to New Hampshire specifically because it's a more free state. Now, he knew it was a free state already, but we provided some real good social science, markers to actually, in a way, prove it, if you will, right? And
I
that's one of
imagine,
the
though, that
reasons
there's
why.
a lot of people in New York who feel totally free, a lot of people in Texas who feel totally free. Is it that they just don't know they're not free?
Yeah, it's a little bit like, what happened before COVID, where everybody thought that their own particular school was good, even if the schools weren't great. And then they actually saw what happened on Zoom and whatnot. And that's why a lot of people have been pushing for educational choice, because they're like, wow, even the school I thought was good isn't that good. And part of that is because people, I think, need to see the data. They need to be educated because, a person doesn't naturally know, like, hey, how do my local taxes compare to Oregon? If you're in New Braunfels, Texas, do you know the comparison between New Braunfels' taxes and Portland, Oregon's, or Des Moines, Iowa, or Dover, New Hampshire? You just don't know. You may not know what the types of regulations are on smoking or on something else. Let's say, guns. People who are gun owners tend to know this more than most.
Yeah.
But let's say like, nurse practitioner scope of practice independence, right? Like that's something you might not know. But when you look at the data, you could be like, oh, no wonder why my healthcare costs more money, because there aren't these types of things that matter. So again, one of the reasons I'm an educator, I used to be a professor at Texas State University and at the UT LBJ school, is I've been an educator, and because I think that providing people information can help them make better decisions, which is something that at the American Institute for Economic Research we do. We really try to promote better economic literacy, a better understanding of freedom, and that includes measuring freedom, and that's why we do this.
Doesn't New Hampshire have the license plate that says "Live Free or Die"? Isn't that New Hampshire that has that?
It does indeed. It's the saying of General John Stark, who is the kind of hero of New Hampshire.
Is your colleague still there? Does he still live there?
He does. In fact, he commutes to Great Barrington, Massachusetts, where we are here, because he works at AIER as well.
So he lives a more free life than you then in New Hampshire up there, huh?
He does. He absolutely does. Look, he doesn't, up there. I mean, again, he works in Massachusetts, but
yeah,
if he worked actually in New Hampshire, then they would pay zero income tax, no sales tax. Their overall tax burden is really low. Again, Texas has high property taxes. New Hampshire has high property taxes, but New Hampshire has no sales tax.
That's nice.
I'm going to close with this. Since you lived in Texas, thankfully, you know how to pronounce New Braunfels. It seems like that city gets butchered more, even by people who live here in Texas. It's amazing some of the pronunciations you get on that. So good on you for that. Yeah. When you lived here in Texas, did you feel personally the lack of personal freedoms? Did you notice it in real time?
Well, I lived there before they passed open carry, and so that was an area where you feel more restricted, right? I think that again, a lot of the things that Texas restricts aren't things that are part of my kind of personal lifestyle. I'm not a big gambler. I don't really care about doing drugs. I'm a Navy reservist. I clearly can't do that and keep my job and keep my clearance. I think that in some areas, like, look, I'd like to have a shiner at a cheaper cost. Who wouldn't, right? So I guess you could say that. I mean, that's part of the trouble of government, right? Is a lot of the costs on your freedom are somewhat hidden or indirect. If you think about the ways that businesses, I mean, to employ someone, right? There's all kinds of hidden costs that the employer doesn't necessarily see. And so that's one of the ways that government can get away with it, is because people don't have the information. So I think it's important to provide that information. But I would say that those property taxes are killer. I sold some property in Texas.
We're living it, man. What are you telling us now? Come on.
Oh, I know, but I would have liked to keep. I had a little ranchette, and I would have liked to keep more of it, but the property taxes were killing me. So I had to sell some of it. I mean, it wasn't the only reason, but it was on the margins. It matters, right? When you have to pay those killer tax bills.
This is a fascinating report, fascinating conversation as well. Before we let you go, do you have a message for Texans?
You're doing well. Again, you could be New York or California, but look, you should be competing with Florida, another big state. Beat Florida, if you will, right? And again, you just beat Florida State, if you will, by getting into the college football playoffs. But look, beat them in terms of freedom. Compete with these other states. I love to see these states compete with each other. I think Texas could do a lot better. And again, educational choice is one issue. Again, I'm not lobbying. I'm not taking a position on any particular bill in front of the Texas legislature. But in general, reforms that free parents and caregivers to choose educational options for their children are much better than kind of zip code assignment or school district assignment. That's a huge thing. Get a handle on your local tax burden. It's killer. And then in regulatory policy, Texas is pretty good, but there are all kinds of areas, right? Whether increase occupational licensing reform efforts. It's not the biggest thing in the world, but on the margins, it matters to people. Let people work for a living without having to get permission.
I guess, and your phone is open and ready to be answered if a Democrat or a Republican from Texas wants to have you down to Austin to go over some of these things.
Absolutely. I want to go to, when I'm in Texas, I want to eat as much barbecue as I can.
The freedom to eat as much barbecue as you can. That needs to be a category.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm a big fan of blacks.
Oh, yeah.
That's one of my
Yeah.
favorites.
Yeah.
Well,
So that's one of the things I miss about Texas. You cannot get good barbecue in Washington D.C. and certainly not in Great Barrington, Massachusetts.
I can imagine.
If you get down here, make sure you get them to lower these property taxes for us. I'm glad you've experienced them firsthand, so you know the shackles in which we live.
It's terrible. But again, local taxes in a way are better than having high state taxes because at least you can vote with your feet.
Yeah,
True.
good point. Good point.
Dr. William Ruger, thank you so much for taking the time. Again, it's called Freedom in the 50 States. You can find it in the book version or online. It is an interesting read for sure. Thanks so much for doing this and taking the time with us.
Yeah, and thanks a lot. And go Longhorns and go Bobcats.
Great stuff. Let me stop the recording here.
Very nice. That was perfect. I'm sorry that we probably went over what I told you this was going to
it's
take,
awesome.
but we get rolling on this and we just keep thinking of more things to ask.
Yeah, keep up the great work. I love this, and I hope you get a lot of good feedback on this because, like you said, it's elements of life that I don't think people realize. So, I mean, kudos to you, bravo.
Yeah, it's great to do it in a place I've lived too, because I understand what's actually going on.
Yeah.
You're not having to look down at notes like Iowa. Let's see.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And again, sometimes you're like that because with 230 variables times 50 states, like I can't remember. If you had asked me like, are raw milk sales legal in Texas? I didn't do my prep on that.
Oh, we should have done a lightning round quiz.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good question. I don't know if they are either. Good question.
Yeah, I can look for you.
Yeah, right. Thanks so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Dr.
All right.
Ruger.
Yep,
We'll
bye-bye.
see you.